November 7th, 1978. Richmond, Virginia. Election night. The returns are coming in for the U.S. Senate race, and John Warner is winning by 4,721 votes, the closest Virginia Senate race of the 20th century. Warner stands on the victory podium, waving to cheering supporters. Behind him, Elizabeth Taylor smiles and applauds, the world's most famous actress, the woman who made this moment possible. "I couldn't have done this without my wife," Warner tells the crowd. "Elizabeth was instrumental in this victory." The words are true, brutally true. Without Elizabeth Taylor's celebrity, Warner would be watching someone else celebrate tonight. For 2 years, Elizabeth campaigned tirelessly for her husband, used her fame to draw crowds, raised money from Hollywood connections, transformed a little-known Virginia lawyer into a viable Senate candidate. She sacrificed her career, her identity, her personal beliefs, all to make John Warner a United States Senator. Now he's won. The victory she delivered is complete. What Elizabeth doesn't know, as she stands behind her victorious husband, is that her usefulness has ended. The celebrity that elected him will now become his burden. The woman who made him senator will spend the next 4 years invisible, lonely, forgotten by the man she elevated to power. This is the story of Elizabeth Taylor's greatest political victory and most devastating personal defeat. How she created a senator and lost herself in the process. The election she won for John Warner, and the abandonment that followed. July 8th, 1976. British Embassy, Washington, D.C. A dinner honoring Queen Elizabeth II's bicentennial visit. Elizabeth Taylor needs a date. She's recently divorced from Richard Burton for the second time, living in isolation on her Virginia farm, trying to rebuild her life without the Welsh actor who defined love for her. John Warner needs publicity. He's director of the American Revolution Bicentennial Administration. Ambitious, handsome, planning a Senate run in 1978. The matchmaker is mutual friend, someone who sees opportunity in pairing Hollywood's biggest star with Washington's most eligible bachelor. "You'll like John," the friend tells Elizabeth. "He's distinguished, stable, everything Richard wasn't." "I'm not looking for romance," Elizabeth replies. "I just need someone respectable to escort me." But the moment Elizabeth and John meet, both recognize the possibilities. Elizabeth sees a man who represents everything Hollywood isn't. Serious, educated, connected to real power instead of make-believe glamour. John sees the ultimate political asset, the most famous woman in the world, someone who could make crowds appear wherever he chose to speak. The dinner is a success. Elizabeth charms British diplomats. John provides sophisticated conversation. They photograph beautifully together. By evening's end, both understand they could help each other. Elizabeth needs respectability after the Burton scandals. John needs celebrity for his political ambitions. "Would you like to see more of Virginia?" John asks as he drives Elizabeth home. "I'd love to," she responds. Neither admits they're negotiating a political partnership disguised as romance. Summer 1976. John Warner begins his courtship of Elizabeth Taylor. But it's as much about politics as romance. Every public appearance is calculated. Warner introduces Elizabeth to Virginia's power brokers. She meets potential donors, learns the names of county Republican chairmen. John is testing the political waters, observers note, and Elizabeth is his calling card. They attend Virginia Military Institute's Founders Day. Elizabeth stands and salutes the cadets. They forget their military bearing and toss their hats in the air. The symbolism is perfect. Elizabeth Taylor making Virginia's young men lose their composure with a simple gesture. If she can do that to disciplined cadets, Warner's advisors whisper, imagine what she'll do to voters. Warner's poll numbers begin rising before he's even announced his candidacy. The mere possibility of Elizabeth campaigning for him generates media attention. Warner Taylor for Senate? Headlines speculate. Will Hollywood glamour win Virginia votes? Elizabeth throws herself into the role, studies Virginia history, memorizes the names of Warner's potential supporters, learns to discuss agricultural issues and defense contracts. I want to be helpful, she tells Warner. I've never been married to someone with serious ambitions before. The comment reveals Elizabeth's psychology. After Burton's theatrical intensity, Warner's political focus feels mature, important, worth supporting. By fall 1976, their relationship is serious. Elizabeth has found purpose in Warner's ambitions. Warner has found the ultimate campaign weapon in Elizabeth's celebrity. December 4th, 1976. They marry at Warner's Virginia farm. Small ceremony. Close friends only. These forgotten stories deserve to be told. If you think so too, subscribe and like this video. Thank you for keeping these memories alive. But everyone understands the implications. John Warner just married the most famous woman in the world. His Senate campaign now has a secret weapon no opponent can match. 1977. John and Elizabeth Warner settle into married life at his Middleburg farm. But their relationship is already more political partnership than romantic marriage. Elizabeth transforms herself into the perfect politician's wife, studies policy positions, memorizes Virginia geography, learns to make small talk with Republican donors. She was incredibly dedicated, recalls a Warner campaign insider. More disciplined than most professional politicians. But the transformation comes at enormous personal cost. Elizabeth is a lifelong Democrat. She believes in civil rights, social programs, liberal causes that conflict with Virginia Republican orthodoxy. Now she must advocate for positions she opposes. Smile at people whose politics she despises. Pretend to support a party that represents everything she's fought against. I have to bite my tongue constantly, Elizabeth tells close friends. These people think poverty is a character flaw. The Republican ladies of Virginia have strong opinions about how senators' wives should behave. And none of their rules accommodate Hollywood glamour. Out with her favorite color purple and in with the tweed and plaid, fashion observers note. Elizabeth is told to cover up more. Wear conservative styles. Avoid anything that draws attention from her husband to herself. People around John Warner told her they didn't want her to wear the color purple, recalls biographer Kate Anderson Brower. Purple, Elizabeth's signature color, the shade that made her eyes appear violet. Banned by Republican wives who consider it too flamboyant. Elizabeth complies, trades her flowing gowns for structured suits, her dramatic jewelry for modest pearls, her individual style for political conformity. The woman who once set fashion trends now follows dress codes written by Virginia matrons. But she endures it all for Warner's political future. and her own desperate need to matter to someone again. 1978. John Warner officially enters the Virginia Senate race. The Republican primary features 3 candidates: Warner, former Governor Linwood Holton, and conservative champion Richard Obenshain. Warner brings significant advantages: personal wealth from his first marriage to Catherine Mellon, distinguished government service as Navy Secretary, impressive credentials. But his secret weapon is Elizabeth. We have never had a celebrity of her magnitude married to a U.S. senator, political observers note. The attention she generates is unprecedented. Elizabeth throws herself into campaigning with religious devotion, attends every fundraiser, speaks at every rally, uses her Hollywood connections to raise money. Elizabeth was willing to do almost anything to get her husband elected, friends recall. She calls major donors personally, writes thank you notes to small contributors, poses for thousands of photographs with voters who just want to meet a movie star. The impact is immediate and overwhelming. Warner events draw massive crowds. People who've never attended political rallies come to see Elizabeth Taylor. They come for her, admits a Warner aide, and hopefully leave supporting him. Elizabeth's presence transforms routine campaign stops into media events. Local TV stations cover Warner's speeches they'd normally ignore. Newspapers send photographers to document Elizabeth's appearances. But the attention creates problems too. Conservative Republicans worry that Hollywood glamour will hurt Warner's credibility. Are we electing a senator or a celebrity? Critics ask. The June Republican Convention becomes a test. Will Virginia Republicans choose the candidate with the movie star wife? The answer is no. Richard Obenshain wins the nomination. Conservative ideology trumps celebrity appeal. Warner is devastated. Elizabeth is humiliated. All her efforts appear wasted. I feel like I hurt John's chances, Elizabeth tells friends. Maybe I'm too much Hollywood for Virginia politics. But fate intervenes. August 2nd, 1978. Richard Obenshain dies in a plane crash. Virginia Republicans must choose a replacement nominee. August 12th. They select John Warner. Elizabeth's campaign weapon will get another chance to prove its power. Fall, 1978. John Warner faces Democrat Andrew Miller in the general election. Miller is formidable. Former state attorney general, experienced campaigner, strong Democratic credentials. But he doesn't have Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth campaigns with renewed intensity. The primary loss convinced her that Warner needs every advantage she can provide. She appears at factory gates at 6 a.m., shakes hands at county fairs, attends church suppers in rural Virginia, uses her celebrity to reach voters Miller can't access. Elizabeth was instrumental in his election, Warner later admits. She deserves full credit for our success. The crowds are extraordinary. Thousands attend Warner rallies just to see Elizabeth. Many stay to hear John's speeches. Elizabeth's Hollywood friends contribute massive amounts of money. Frank Sinatra writes checks. Sammy Davis Jr. makes phone calls. The entertainment industry supports Warner because Elizabeth asks them to. But the cost to Elizabeth is enormous. She abandons movie projects, turns down lucrative offers, sacrifices her own career for Warner's political ambitions. She was so underutilized, observes biographer Kate Anderson Brower. She had this pent-up reserve of passion for social issues and political activism, and she couldn't actually do it. Elizabeth must suppress her own political beliefs to support Warner's conservative positions. Smile while he opposes programs she supports. Applaud speeches that advocate policies she despises. The Doonesbury comic strip captures the absurdity. Creator Gary Trudeau refers to Warner as Senator Elizabeth Taylor, acknowledging that her celebrity overshadows his identity. The joke stings because it's accurate. Elizabeth is the reason people notice John Warner. Without her, he'd be another anonymous candidate. Election night, November 7th, 1978. The returns are incredibly close. Warner wins by just 4,721 votes out of 1.2 million cast. The margin proves Elizabeth's value. Without her crowds, her money, her celebrity drawing power, Warner loses. "I couldn't have done this without my wife," Warner tells victory celebrations. Elizabeth was instrumental in this victory. The words acknowledge a political debt that will never be repaid. January 1979. John Warner is sworn in as United States Senator from Virginia. Elizabeth watches from the gallery, proud of their shared achievement. But the moment Warner takes his oath, Elizabeth's value begins declining. Once John was elected, Elizabeth felt as if she had no function, observers note. The celebrity that elected him now becomes a liability. Senate colleagues whisper about the movie star senator. Lobbyists wonder if they should approach Warner or his famous wife. Elizabeth discovers that being a senator's wife in Washington means becoming invisible. Spouses are to be seen and not heard, explains the unwritten rule. They smile at receptions and stay silent during policy discussions. For Elizabeth Taylor, one of the most accomplished women in the world, the role is suffocating. She attends Senate wives' luncheons, where conversation focuses on recipes and charity galas. Sits through dinner parties where men discuss legislation while women talk about children. She was so underutilized, notes political observer Kate Brower. The conservative climate didn't make room for spouses to be politically active. Elizabeth has strong opinions about civil rights, health care, social justice. But expressing those views would hurt Warner's conservative credibility. So she stays silent. The woman who commanded million-dollar salaries for her opinions now bites her tongue at political events. The loneliness begins immediately. Warner spends 18-hour days at the Capitol. Elizabeth sits alone in their Georgetown home, with nothing meaningful to occupy her time. "I just couldn't bear the intense loneliness," Elizabeth later writes. John became completely engrossed in his Senate duties. The man who promised her partnership now treats her like a political accessory, useful for photo opportunities, silent during important conversations. Elizabeth tries to adapt. She volunteers for Republican charities, hosts fundraising teas, plays the role of dutiful political wife. But her heart isn't in it. The causes don't inspire her. The people don't understand her. The work feels meaningless compared to her previous career. She would have enjoyed being a first lady who was really politically active, Brower observes. Kind of a pre-Hillary Clinton era. But Hillary Clinton is decades in the future. In 1979, political wives are ornamental. And Elizabeth Taylor, Academy Award winner, international icon, business mogul, becomes another silent ornament. 1980, Elizabeth's frustration with Senate wife invisibility begins manifesting in small rebellions. The Republican ladies hold a luncheon in her honor. They explicitly instruct her not to wear purple. her favorite color, her signature shade, the color that makes her violet eyes luminous. People around John Warner told her they didn't want her to wear the color purple, recalls biographer Kate Brower. Elizabeth arrives at the luncheon wearing a stunning purple ensemble. Head to toe, defiant, beautiful. She took small, sweet acts of revenge where she could, friends observe, such as proudly wearing purple to a luncheon thrown for her by the Republican ladies after explicitly being told not to. The gesture is perfect, subtle enough to maintain plausible deniability, obvious enough to communicate resistance. If you want more untold stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. Your support means everything to us, but the Purple Rebellion is just the beginning. Elizabeth starts expressing opinions at dinner parties, questioning Republican orthodoxy, making clear her disagreement with Warner's positions. Warner's staff panics. The senator's wife is supposed to support her husband publicly, regardless of private disagreements. Elizabeth needs to understand her role. Warner's chief of staff tells him, political wives don't freelance. Warner pressures Elizabeth to conform, stay silent, smile, and agree with everything he says publicly. The pressure creates enormous strain. Elizabeth feels trapped between her convictions and her marriage, forced to choose between honesty and loyalty. She chooses marriage, but the resentment builds daily. Elizabeth begins drinking more heavily, taking prescription pills to cope with depression, gaining weight from inactivity and unhappiness. Joan Rivers makes cruel jokes about Elizabeth's appearance. Elizabeth Taylor is so fat. When she sits around the house, she sits around the house. The humor is vicious, but reflects public perception. Elizabeth Taylor is becoming a political wife cliché, invisible, silent, decorative. But inside, she's dying. The woman who once commanded global attention now struggles for her husband's basic consideration. Life in politics stifled Elizabeth's true nature, biographers note. The marriage was going downhill fast. 1981 Warner is now an established senator. His committee assignments are important, his political future bright, his debt to Elizabeth apparently forgotten. Elizabeth tries to revive her acting career, accepts the lead role in The Little Foxes on Broadway. Her return to theater after years of political wife duties. The role represents salvation, a chance to be Elizabeth Taylor again, not just Mrs. John Warner. Professional validation beyond Republican ladies' luncheons. But Warner resents her renewed career focus. He wants a wife available for political events, someone whose schedule revolves around his ambitions. John expected Elizabeth to prioritize his career over everything else, friends observe, including her own professional identity. The conflict intensifies as Elizabeth's Broadway run succeeds. Critics praise her performance. Audiences flock to see her return to live theater. For the first time in years, Elizabeth feels professionally fulfilled, artistically challenged, personally valued for her talents rather than her marriage. But Warner can't accept his wife's independent success. He makes demands, scheduling conflicts, subtle sabotage. Then comes the final betrayal. Elizabeth is in New York, starring in The Little Foxes, peak of her Broadway comeback. Professional triumph after years of political invisibility. Warner calls with news. He's purchased an apartment at the Watergate complex, made the decision unilaterally, and oh, by the way, he's given away all her animals, all of them. The pets she treasured, her emotional companions during lonely Senate wife years. Gone, without consultation, without consideration. The final straw for Elizabeth was while she was on Broadway, starring in The Little Foxes. John called to inform her that he purchased a place at the Watergate and gave all her animals away, biographers record. The cruelty is stunning, disposing of her beloved pets while she's working, making major life decisions without input, treating her like a subordinate rather than a partner. Elizabeth realizes the truth. Warner never saw her as an equal, always as a political asset to be managed. The woman who elected him senator has become an inconvenience to be controlled. 1982, Elizabeth files for divorce from John Warner. The political marriage that began with mutual ambition ends with mutual exhaustion. The two finally divorced in 1982, records show, after having decades to reflect on her seventh marriage. The public explanation is diplomatic. Irreconcilable differences grew apart. Different priorities. But insiders understand the real story. Elizabeth created a senator and was discarded when her usefulness ended. She was so underutilized, political observers note, and she had this pent-up reserve of passion for social issues and political activism, and she couldn't actually do it. The divorce proceedings are civilized. Warner keeps his Senate seat. Elizabeth keeps her dignity. Both avoid public recriminations. But Elizabeth's friends understand her bitterness. She sacrificed her career, her beliefs, her identity to make Warner a senator. In return, he gave her loneliness and animal disposal. Always gracious, Elizabeth remained friends with Warner until she passed away, biographers note, and wished him happiness in his new marriage. The gracious facade masks deeper truths. Elizabeth learned that political marriages are business arrangements. That celebrity can elect senators, but can't sustain relationships. Most painfully, she learned that Warner never loved Elizabeth Taylor, the woman. He loved Elizabeth Taylor, the campaign weapon. Years later, Elizabeth reflects on the Warner marriage with characteristic honesty. After Richard, the men in my life were just there to hold the coat, to open the door, she admits. All the men after Richard were really just company. Warner was company. Pleasant, useful, respectable. But never the love of her life, never an equal partner, always a political calculation. 1982 to 2009. John Warner serves 27 more years in the Senate, becomes a respected voice on defense issues, chairs important committees, builds a distinguished political legacy. But everyone understands the foundation of his success. Elizabeth Taylor's celebrity made him viable in 1978. The Doonesbury comic strip lampooned him as Senator Elizabeth Taylor, political historians note. Her fame overshadowed his entire career. Warner wins re-election easily in 1984, 1990, 1996, and 2002. Virginia voters forget that Elizabeth elected him originally. But political insiders remember. That popularity was only amplified by his marriage to a mega movie star, which drew huge crowds when he was elected to the Senate in 1978. Obituaries will later note. Warner never remarries until 2003. 21 years after divorcing Elizabeth, as if understanding that no subsequent wife could match her political value. In 2008, he retires from the Senate. 30 years of service. Distinguished career, bipartisan respect. His farewell speech mentions many people who supported his career, staff members, political allies, Virginia voters. He doesn't mention Elizabeth Taylor, the woman who made his Senate career possible. The omission reveals everything. Warner built his legacy on borrowed fame and spent decades trying to erase the debt. Years later, Elizabeth reflects on her marriage to John Warner with characteristic honesty and hard-earned wisdom. "I thought I was helping a good man achieve important goals," she tells biographers. "I didn't realize I was just a campaign tool." The Warner marriage represents Elizabeth's most selfless relationship. She sacrificed everything for his political success and received nothing in return. She was instrumental in his election to the Senate, and even he gave her full credit for his success, historical records show. But credit wasn't enough. Elizabeth needed partnership, respect, love that valued her as more than a political asset. Life in politics stifled Elizabeth's true nature, biographers observe. The marriage ended after 6 years. Elizabeth learned that political marriages operate by different rules. Celebrity wives are expected to be seen and not heard, to support positions they oppose, to smile while being ignored. She would have enjoyed being a first lady who was really politically active, kind of a pre-Hillary Clinton era, political observer Kate Brower notes. But Elizabeth was born too early for political partnership, too accomplished for traditional political wife roles, too honest for the fake smiles politics demanded. The Warner marriage taught Elizabeth valuable lessons about power and relationships, how men use women's talents for their own advancement, how political ambition corrodes personal connections. Most importantly, she learned to value herself beyond her usefulness to others, to recognize when she was being exploited rather than loved. After Richard, the men in my life were just there to hold the coat, to open the door, Elizabeth admits. All the men after Richard were really just company. John Warner was company, pleasant company, but never an equal partner, never someone who valued Elizabeth Taylor for herself rather than her fame. The story of Elizabeth Taylor and John Warner is ultimately about political debt and personal betrayal. Elizabeth delivered Warner's Senate victory through her celebrity, her connections, her tireless campaigning. Without her, he loses to Andrew Miller in 1978. "Elizabeth was instrumental in his election," Warner admitted. "She deserves full credit for our success." But credit doesn't equal gratitude. Acknowledgement doesn't ensure appreciation. Once elected, Warner treated Elizabeth as a political liability rather than a partnership asset. Her celebrity became embarrassing. Her opinions became inconvenient. Her needs became irrelevant. The woman who created Senator John Warner was systematically erased from his political identity. Once John was elected, Elizabeth felt as if she had no function, observers noted. The intense loneliness when he became engrossed in his Senate duties. The loneliness was deliberate. Warner distanced himself from the celebrity that elected him, tried to establish independent political credibility. But political insiders always remembered the truth. John Warner became senator because Elizabeth Taylor made him famous enough to win. The Doonesbury comic strip lampooned him as Senator Elizabeth Taylor, proving that even cartoonists understood the power dynamics. Elizabeth's sacrifice was complete. She abandoned her career, suppressed her beliefs, surrendered her identity, all to make John Warner a United States Senator. In return, she got loneliness, control, and ultimately, divorce. The final insult: Warner's disposal of her animals while she performed on Broadway. The ultimate symbol of his disregard for her emotional needs. Elizabeth Taylor made John Warner a senator, and John Warner made Elizabeth Taylor invisible. The election she won for him, the abandonment she suffered from him, the greatest political debt in American history that was never properly repaid. November 7th, 1978. Election night. John Warner wins the Virginia Senate race by 4,721 votes. Elizabeth Taylor stands beside him, applauding his victory. The victory she delivered through 2 years of tireless campaigning. "I couldn't have done this without my wife," Warner tells the crowd. Elizabeth was instrumental in this victory. The words acknowledge a debt that will define their relationship. Warner owes his Senate career to Elizabeth's celebrity. But debt creates resentment. Once elected, Warner begins erasing Elizabeth from his political identity. The celebrity that elected him becomes the burden he carries. Elizabeth transforms from political asset to political liability, from campaign weapon to Senate wife ornament. The woman who made crowds appear wherever Warner spoke becomes the wife who must stay silent at Republican luncheons. 1982, Elizabeth divorces Warner. The political marriage ends in mutual exhaustion. He keeps his Senate seat. She reclaims her voice. Life in politics stifled Elizabeth's true nature, biographers note. The marriage ended after 6 years. Elizabeth Taylor got John Warner elected senator, and John Warner completely ignored her. The election victory that proved celebrity power in American politics. The marriage that proved political ambition corrupts personal relationships. The woman who created a senator and was discarded when her usefulness ended. Elizabeth Taylor, Academy Award winner, international icon, political kingmaker. The woman who learned that in politics, even love is just another campaign tool. John Warner, United States Senator for 30 years, distinguished public servant, defense expert. The man who built his career on borrowed fame and spent decades trying to forget the debt, the senator she made, the marriage she lost. The political lesson that proved power corrupts everything, even gratitude. Behind Hollywood's golden facade, the biggest stars hid the darkest secrets. Every glamorous smile concealed scandals that would shock the world. If you want to uncover more hidden truths about classic Hollywood's biggest legends, subscribe now and hit that notification bell. The real stories are always more shocking than the movies.